young girl was alone at home for a little while and then just vanished. What happened next was like something from a scary movie. It was so strange and unbelievable that it happened in real life. It took 15 long years to figure out what happened. When people finally knew the truth, they were very angry and shocked. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in Shepherdsville, Kentucky, a small, close-knit farming town. As the eldest of 3 children, she often helped her parents with her younger brothers, which made her quite responsible. At 15, she took a part-time job at a local restaurant to save up for her dream car, a red Pontiac, which she managed to buy a few years later. Despite working, Jessica excelled in school and planned to become an accountant. By the fall of 1999, she was 17, in her senior year, and excited about her new boyfriend. The morning of Friday, September 10, 1999, Jessica's day started normally. Her parents left for work, and her younger brothers went to the bus stop. Jessica stayed home with plans to drive to school later. However, around noon, her mother returned home and noticed Jessica's car still parked outside, even though she should have been in class. Concerned, she went inside and checked Jessica's room, but found it empty. She then called Jessica's father, who confirmed he had gone to work alone. Worried, Jessica's mother checked the car and found the driver's door slightly open. Jessica's cell phone was on the seat, with the numbers 911 dialed but not completed. One of Jessica's shoes and her keys were under the front seat, and her textbooks, work clothes, and purse were in the back. Jessica's mother was alarmed. It was clear something was wrong. It was unlikely that Jessica would have left her belongings behind and walked several miles, especially since they lived on the town's outskirts. When her parents contacted the school, they learned Jessica hadn't attended class, and the school had failed to notify them. A few hours later, Jessica's best friend from the restaurant called her parents, saying Jessica hadn't shown up for her shift. This added to their worry, especially given Jessica's absence from school and work, and the troubling fact that her belongings, including her phone with 911 dialed, were left in an unlocked car. Jessica's parents decided to call the police. However, the sheriff dismissed their concerns, suggesting Jessica had probably just wandered off and would return eventually. He didn't even acknowledge that one of her shoes was missing, which would have made it hard for her to travel far. Despite their pleas, the sheriff refused to start an investigation, forcing Jessica's parents to return home. Determined to find their daughter, Jessica's parents enlisted the help of relatives, friends, and acquaintances, but no one had seen her. They organized a search throughout town, but there was no sign of Jessica. The next morning, they returned to the sheriff, informing him that Jessica still hadn't come home. This time, he sent 2 officers to inspect her car. Unfortunately, the officers examined the vehicle without gloves, touching everything with their bare hands, and didn't check Jessica's room, which was standard procedure. Disheartened by the police's lack of thoroughness, Jessica's parents turned to the local media to publicize their daughter's disappearance and criticize the police's inaction. Along with their relatives and friends, they started their own search and distributed flyers with Jessica's information. Jessica's father and his brother Stanley, who knew the area well, led the search near a local river. This area had a bad reputation for being frequented by drug dealers and criminals due to its overgrown, secluded nature. Despite hours of searching through the tough terrain, they found no trace of Jessica. The next morning, something extremely unsettling occurred. Jessica's parents were at home when their son, playing in the yard, burst inside, claiming he had heard a cry for help that sounded like his sister's voice. Jessica's father grabbed his shotgun and rushed outside to investigate, while his brother arrived at the house and joined the search. As they searched, they noticed smoke rising from the property of their 40-year-old neighbor, David Brooks. Approaching the area, they saw Brooks burning what appeared to be clothing. This sight struck them as highly suspicious. Jessica's father asked Brooks for permission to search his property, but Brooks refused and told them to leave. Brooks's behavior had become increasingly odd since Jessica's disappearance. Although he had previously maintained a normal relationship with Jessica's family, he began driving slowly past their home, staring at them with an unsettling smile. Additionally, Jessica's parents received mysterious phone calls from an unknown man who would only breathe heavily into the phone. They suspected Brooks was behind these calls, but couldn't figure out his motive. Disturbed by Brooks's actions, Jessica's parents decided to involve the police again, sharing their concerns and urging them to bring in cadaver dogs. The officers agreed and used Jessica's clothes to track her scent. The dogs led them to the fire pit on Brooks's property. but no substantial evidence was found. They did discover black gloves in one of Brooks's sheds, which had a smell associated with decomposition. Despite Brooks's increasingly suspicious behavior, the police did not connect him to Jessica's disappearance and left without making any significant progress. Frustrated by the police's lack of action, Jessica's father reached out to the FBI. Although the Bureau typically avoids starting investigations based solely on calls from relatives, they decided to get involved given the troubling details provided. After a thorough review, the FBI concluded that something truly horrific might have happened to Jessica. The FBI launched a serious investigation, something the local authorities had been reluctant to do. Agents collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and car, seized all potential evidence, and sent it to the lab for analysis. They conducted an extensive ground search, using helicopters and volunteers, and examined the bottom of a nearby pond where they considered Jessica's body might be hidden. During their investigation of Brooks's farm, they made a disturbing discovery. A printed photo of Jessica was found in one of Brooks's sheds. After the unsettling discovery of the body, detectives were nearly certain that David Brooks was involved in Jessica's disappearance. They also began to suspect his 35-year-old brother Joseph, due to his odd behavior during the search of their property. However, the evidence gathered was insufficient for an arrest, so investigators focused their efforts on searching the area, coming to the grim conclusion that Jessica was likely deceased. On September 27th, 17 days after Jessica's disappearance, the police received a call from a woman driving near the river where Jessica's father had previously searched. She noticed something unusual near a tree off the road and decided to investigate. Upon closer inspection, she realized it resembled a human body and immediately contacted the police. When FBI agents arrived at the scene, they found the lifeless body of a young woman who was missing fingers and limbs. A rope with traces of red and silver paint was tied around her legs, and parts of her clothing were missing, suggesting possible sexual assault. Due to the body's advanced decomposition, the police couldn't initially confirm the identity. Jessica's father was too distressed to view the body, but her mother identified it by a small butterfly tattoo on the body, matching her daughter's. Medical experts later confirmed the body was indeed Jessica and determined that she had been strangled. Bruises and post-mortem limb and finger detachment indicated she had been alive for approximately 3 days after her disappearance. A distressing fact that meant the police might have had an opportunity to save her, but did not act. Following the discovery, the FBI re-interviewed Brooks, who initially claimed to have seen Jessica near her house the morning she disappeared, but later changed his story, saying he hadn't seen her at all and had been at home in bed with his wife. His wife contradicted this claim. During further questioning, Brooks's response to a hypothetical about finding his fingerprints on the victim's body was suspiciously evasive. He said he would confess if that were the case. He also failed a polygraph test, leading the FBI to arrest him and prepare for trial, despite having only indirect evidence linking him to the crime. As trial preparations continued, investigators recalled that during a search of Brooks's car, they had found a rope similar to the one used to tie the victim's legs. However, no DNA was recovered from it, making it another piece of circumstantial evidence. The trial began in January 2003, with Brooks's lawyer emphasizing the lack of direct evidence and asserting his client's innocence. The trial revealed an additional mishap. The victim's missing limbs, discovered alongside the body, had been improperly stored at room temperature rather than in refrigeration, causing their decomposition and losing any potential DNA evidence. Given the insufficient weight of the remaining circumstantial evidence, the jury could not reach a unanimous decision, and Brooks was acquitted. Under state laws, he could only be charged again if new evidence emerged. For Jessica's parents, this was a crushing blow. They had almost no doubt that Brooks was responsible for their daughter's murder. They also felt that if the police had taken their concerns more seriously, their daughter might have been saved. In the end, they lost all hope of achieving justice. As the years went by, the case remained unsolved and was eventually nearly abandoned. In 2012, Detective Lynn Hunt joined the local police department and was assigned to investigate unsolved cases. Her initial focus fell on Jessica Dishon's murder. Upon reviewing the case files, Hunt was appalled by the negligence of her predecessors. The documents were filled with errors, lacked any reference to conversations with involved parties, and the evidence was poorly documented. Essentially, the case was so poorly handled that she had to start the investigation from scratch. 13 years after the murder, Hunt's first step was to speak with Jessica's family. One of her brothers, now an adult living separately from his parents, handed her a box of Jessica's belongings from her car. which he had kept since the police returned them. Hunt was again stunned by how carelessly the evidence had been handled, noting that these items were now unlikely to be helpful. Undeterred, Hunt diligently examined everything she could find. Among the documents, she discovered Brooks's medical examination report, which noted his IQ was only 61, a significantly low score. This raised concerns about the police's actions, including Brooks's interrogations. Given his low IQ, he might not have fully understood the questions and could have provided inadequate answers. Hunt began to consider that Brooks might have had no connection to the case at all, as his odd behavior could be attributed to his low IQ. Hunt then broadened her investigation, researching everyone involved in the case and those living nearby. In September 2014, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death, a colleague from another department contacted Hunt with intriguing information. An inmate at Kentucky State Prison claimed to know the true identity of Jessica Dishon's murderer. Hunt approached this lead with some skepticism, aware that inmates often fabricate stories to secure early release or better conditions. However, she understood the importance of verifying the information. She visited the prison and met with the inmate who had the information. The inmate revealed that he had shared a cell with a man convicted of child abuse, the same charge as his own. They had become friends and discussed their crimes. According to the inmate, his cellmate had confessed to murdering Jessica Dishon. He then provided Hunt with the name of this man, leading her to the next crucial step in the investigation. In shock, Detective Hunt learned that the informant had named Stanley Dish, Jessica's uncle and her father's brother, as the murderer. According to the informant, Stanley had been sexually abusing Jessica for years while living in their home. He had threatened to kill her or someone close to her if she ever spoke about the abuse. In the spring of 1999, when Jessica started dating, Stanley feared she might eventually tell her boyfriend about the abuse. On the morning of September 10th, Stanley arrived at Jessica's house while she was alone. She was outside loading her belongings into her car when Stanley approached her and demanded that she break up with her boyfriend. Jessica refused and threatened to expose him if he didn't leave her alone. Stanley then started threatening her, prompting Jessica to reach for her phone to dial 911. Stanley tried to grab her, but Jessica managed to break free and ran into the house. Stanley followed her, struck her, and bound her in her sheets before taking her to an abandoned shed, not far from where her body would later be discovered. Stanley kept Jessica alive in the shed for several days, subjecting her to abuse and torture before killing her. He moved her body to a visible location near the road and buried the sheets in the ground beneath the shed. To mislead the police, Stanley also removed some of Jessica's limbs, hoping to make it look like drug traffickers were involved. The informant revealed that Stanley had buried one of Jessica's shoes beneath a broken tree near the shed. This detail was significant because only Jessica's closest relatives knew about the missing limbs, which indicated that the informant's information was credible. Determined to verify the informant's claims, Detective Hunt, facing a shortage of resources at the local police department, enlisted the help of Jessica's brother and a few other relatives for the search. She did not reveal to them that Stanley might be the murderer, but aimed to find evidence to support the accusations. On the first day of the search, despite digging in the areas described by the informant, they found no clues under the pouring rain. However, the following day, Jessica's brother and Hunt returned to the site. On their way, Jessica's brother pointed out an abandoned barn along the road. They decided to investigate and started digging inside the barn. Almost immediately, they uncovered a long-awaited breakthrough, a buried bedsheet. Hunt collected the evidence and hurried to Jessica's home. Because her parents had preserved Jessica's room exactly as it was on the day she disappeared, Hunt could confirm that the found sheet was part of Jessica's bedding. It was missing from the bed, and the pattern matched the other linen in the room. Following this discovery, Stanley was arrested and brought in for questioning. Though visibly shaken, Stanley refused to confess. He was charged with Jessica's murder, and the case proceeded to court. Jessica's dad couldn't believe his brother did this terrible thing to his daughter. He didn't want to believe it at first, but then he knew it was true. Later, he remembered that in the beginning, his brother said they should look for Jessica near the river, but then his brother felt sick, and they had to go home. That place was close to where they later found Jessica's body. It seemed like his brother didn't want them to find Jessica when she was still alive. The police looked into Jessica's uncle's past. They knew he hurt another girl in the family before. But then they found out something even worse. Other women in the family said he hurt them too when they were kids. He would come to live with them and then hurt the girls. The police thought he had been doing this for a long time. Even though they knew he did it, it was hard to prove. There wasn't a lot of evidence like fingerprints or DNA. The detective looked at old case files and found something wrong. The police who worked on the case before didn't do a good job. In the box, Detective Hunt discovered a letter dated June 26, 2002. The letter contained details that mirrored the story she had heard 12 years later from an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison. By the summer of 2002, Stanley was already serving time for assaulting an underage relative. During his incarceration, Stanley confided in his cellmate about Jessica's murder. The cellmate, who was also a police informant, wrote to the department handling the case, revealing the horrific details of Stanley's crimes against his niece. However, the police ignored the letter, likely convinced that Brooks was the primary suspect at the time and did not consider other possibilities. Hunt was dismayed by her colleagues' negligence. Had they taken the letter seriously, the case might have been solved in 2002. After all these years, she could only wait for the trial, hoping that Stanley would finally face justice for his actions. The trial began in 2015, with Stanley maintaining his innocence. In the courtroom, Jessica's parents struggled to look at their relative who had devastated their lives. They were also frustrated by his refusal to confess, which denied them closure. The prosecution was concerned about the slim chance of securing a murder conviction due to the lack of substantial evidence. Additionally, the assault charges against Stanley involved other family members who would need to testify about the abuse in detail. To avoid a lengthy and difficult trial, the prosecution offered Stanley a plea deal. In exchange for his confession to both the assaults and Jessica's murder, they would drop the death penalty. Stanley agreed to the deal and pleaded guilty. Under the plea agreement, he was not required to provide specific details about the crimes, which disappointed Jessica's parents, who wanted the full truth. Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Given he was 56 at the time of sentencing, he could be released at 71. After the trial, Jessica's father vowed that if Stanley was ever released from prison, he would be waiting to take matters into his own hands. In 2019, Stanley gave his first interview, claiming he did not kill Jessica and that he was at work that morning, a statement that could not be verified after 2 decades. He also failed to explain how 2 separate informants could provide identical details, including the specific burial site of the bedsheets. David Brooks remains a potential minor suspect in the case. Stanley knew Brooks and might have involved him in disposing of evidence. Brooks's low IQ could have led him to misunderstand the situation, possibly burning Jessica's clothes and receiving gloves with the scent of the body. It's also possible that Brooks left Jessica's photo in Stanley's shed to frame him. However, with Brooks's death in 2021 due to heart problems, the full truth may never be known. The moment when Jessica's younger brother heard a cry for help on the 3rd day of her disappearance remains unresolved. It's unclear if Jessica was still alive at that time, as Stanley might have been holding her in the barn a few miles away from home. It's possible the child imagined the cry due to stress, or it could have been someone else screaming. Although Stanley drove up to the house shortly after the cry was heard, suggesting he was nearby, the theory that Jessica was in his car with her mouth taped shut remains highly improbable. Share your thoughts on this story in the comment section, and don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching.